All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Gender Justice Conference. My name is Yami Reyes, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. We joined today's conference with the intent to explore the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to engage in social change work with a special focus on disrupting gender oppression. Thank you for being here with us today. You are currently in the session, Faculty Spotlight Session, Muslim Women's Rights, Unpacking a Hegemonic Liberal-Secular Framework. Just a note, we will be recording our session today. For this session, we are in a Zoom webinar, which means that your video will not be on the recording. However, we invite you to change your Zoom name to promote anonymity if needed. In addition, please note that we have an ASL interpreter as well as live captioning available during this session. I'd invite you at this time to use the rename function on Zoom to include your pronouns next to your name. In addition, Tess Spencer will be our Zoom moderator for this session. Tess will monitor the chat. If you have any questions about technology or how to access the live captioning, please use the chat and we will do our best to answer your questions. In addition, Tess will ensure we are all upholding our community agreement, which can be found in our conference support hub. If at any time you are in violation of our community agreement, you may be asked to leave. At this time, I have the honor of introducing the presenter for today's session. We are joined here today by Dr. Tabassum F. Ruby. Dr. Tabassum F. Ruby obtained a PhD in Women's Studies, now Gender, Feminist, and Women's Studies from York University in Toronto, Canada in 2010. She also earned graduate and undergraduate degrees in philosophy and women's studies. Prior to joining Westchester in 2016, Dr. Ruby held a postdoctoral faculty position in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at Western Michigan University, and an instructor position in the Departments of American Culture Studies and Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Bowling Green State University. Dr. Ruby's research centers on Islam and gender discourses and on modernity and secularism. In 2018, Dr. Ruby was awarded the Provost Research Grant for her new book project, Religion and Globalization, the Silent Transformations in the Lives of Pakistani Women. She was also selected as a Spotlight on Faculty Research recipient. Her first book, Muslim Women's Rights, Contesting Liberal-Secular Sensibilities in Canada, examines the ways liberal secular normative values have shaped and informed the question of Muslim women's rights. At this time, I'd like to turn the session over to Dr. Ruby. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yami, for this amazing introduction. And give me a second to share my PowerPoints with you, and we will go from there. So thank you again, everyone, and especially thank you for inviting me for this amazing conference. I know that any conference like that is a result of very much a bigger effort with many people coming together. So I really appreciate all of those who have put together this amazing conference, and also for inviting me, and Yami for your wonderful introduction. So as Yami said, that this presentation is based on my first book, Muslim Women's Rights, Contesting Liberal-Secular Sensibilities in Canada. And this is a book, and the talk based on this book is something that carried out for my PhD research. So in the plan that for the rest of an hour that we are together is that I'm going to give you some background information, what led me to conduct this research, what questions I asked, why I asked those questions, how I engage with them, and what are some of the conclusions that I drew based on that research, and why we should be taking those questions and findings importantly, or what is their significance. So this is something that is just a plan that I wanted to share with you, and that moving forward, this is something that you expect. So in terms of little background, I am exploring Ontario Sharia laws. Sharia laws means Islamic laws. These debates that they happened between 2003 and 6 over the period of 3 years of time. And I use them as a case study to identify and explore and examine the ways in which Muslim women's rights is shaped and addressed in the contemporary situation. And just to give you a little bit more background about these debates, they started when an Islamic organization in Canada, Ontario, the Islamic Institute of Civil Justice, made this announcement that Muslims can resolve their family disputes through faith-based arbitration using Sharia laws or Islamic laws. This announcement, when they say family dispute, was restricted to just divorce and will. Once one person dies, what is going to happen to their assets. So it is very narrowly saturated proposal that divorce and will can happen through Islamic laws. These announcements gave the impression as if in Canada or Ontario government has given a special permission to Muslims to use their Islamic laws to resolve family issues. Nonetheless, faith-based arbitration, they already existed. They existed more than 100 years in Canada. Jewish, Christian, Muslims, other faith communities, they always have used faith-based arbitration. So it was nothing new per se. But that announcement, while created a false impression that as if it is a new permission that Muslims have gotten, but they were hoping to get a legal status. Once they divorce is finalized using a faith-based arbitration, it becomes legal. That has not been the case. People can resolve family dispute privately. Nonetheless, they wanted to get a legal status. So as this announcement came out, many women's rights organizations, both in Canada and across other countries, they started lobbying against this proposal. And their premise was that Canada should not allow any Muslim laws or Sharia laws to resolve family disputes. So as you will see that I have some names of the organization, they were at the forefront of lobbying against such laws. And you will recognize that Canadian Council of Muslim Women and Muslim Canadian Congress, they themselves identify as Muslim, and they were among those who were against resolving family dispute through Islamic laws. But there are other organization, and they were a combination of many different organizations coming together, no religious arbitration coalition, which means that many organizations, they were concerned about Muslim women's rights, all women's rights, generally speaking. They were coming together under this umbrella. And then the international campaign against Sharia law, Sharia court in Canada was another global organization that was led by also some very prominent women's rights organizations. So it became really a global campaign. It was, people were protesting in other countries in front of Canadian High Commission or embassies in London, Paris, other countries in Western countries. but what was happening in Canada at that moment was also making headlines around the globe. People are paying attention to what the Canadian government is going to do now, because it was also a little bit complicated situation in terms of that if they don't allow, if the Canadian government doesn't allow, then Muslims can resolve their family disputes. It means that religion is a fundamental freedom, right of freedom, that everybody should be exercising it. So it is an infringement on that fundamental right. But if Canadian government allows, under this enormous pressure that is internationally on them, that this rubric that women's rights are in danger, then they are also facing some criticism. So we can see that it is a complicated situation, and how do we unpack that or handle that was not easy. We built into those people who were opposing such a proposal, we can see that there are also they are built into binary thinking. There are two options. One is that if you are going to opt for Islamic laws, they are going to oppress women. So it is not that we want, built into anti-Islamic family laws. If we opt for other position, that we want to protect women's rights, and those rights are only protected within the Canadian civil laws, then we are pro-Canadian civil laws. But this binary thinking itself is built into othering and racist and sexist tropes that we are familiar with. So before I unpack some of the arguments and see why and how they were Islamophobic and how they were built into sexist tropes, I just also wanted to emphasize that the arbitration act that Muslim, those who were proposing, they were hoping to use was 1991 Act that was basically Alternative Resolution Act, and in 2006, February 2006, the government of Ontario amended it. So under this now current law, any divorce that or any family dispute that has not used any Canadian jurisdiction has no legal binding. So this again mean that people can resolve their family dispute if they want to through faith-based arbitration, not just Muslim, but anybody. But it is not going to have a legal binding. And this is something that the proposal was hoping. So before, again, I move forward with some of the arguments that I explore in this book, I also wanted to saturate this research and this book in the background, my personal background, as we know that especially in the discipline of women's and gender studies, it is a known fact that a person is political. Whatever we are doing, it has most often than not a personal relevance. So at that time, I started my PhD doing in women's and gender studies department in Canada, in Toronto, York University in 2003. And that's when these debates started. I was a PhD student, intellectually, an intellectual space where sometimes most amazing things happen. And as I was doing my study and towards my PhD, I was sitting in classroom from professors, my peers, here and there. These concerns that while these debates were going on, media was quite hype on them. There were legislative debates taking over, and there was, over the period of 3 years, you can imagine that it's a long period of time to address any concern like that. So there was a lot of attention to this proposal. And as a Muslim woman, I have a personal interest in it. Not only personally, it was affecting me, but also intellectually, and as something, a student who was doing PhD. So on a personal level, I was little disturbed the way the debates were formed, because they were bordering on Islamophobic and sexist ideas. As I said, that underpinning assumption was that Islam is oppressive, and if Muslim women are going to opt for religious laws to resolve their family disputes, they are going to face oppression. But as I was hearing this, I was trying to avoid them nonetheless. That was my response. I didn't want to get into them because I didn't know how to handle that, because apparently those ideas were making sense to me, and I don't know how to challenge them, even though I was also recognizing that there is something off here, something is not fitting well here, but I was not able to pinpoint at that moment. While I tried to avoid that, I ended up using those debates as my case studies. And the key questions that I raised in my research was that, how do liberal secular modes of thoughts construct an image of the oppressed Muslim women? Because as you can recognize, that was the underpinning idea, that if we resolve issues through using Islamic laws, then Muslim women are going to face oppression. But as I also mentioned, that I was a little disturbed, and I was disturbed because I was well familiar with the scholarship, and personally that such arguments have been used for such a long period of time. And something that we all know called Orientalist discourse, that is a contrasting image right from the at least 18th to 19th centuries colonial period. We know that Orientalist discourses are presented like that, in which the Orient is backward, the Orient is not civilized, and it is the responsibility of the Western enlightened subjects to civilize them. It's a contrasting image. Whatever values we as Western hold, they are exactly the opposite. The Orientals are exactly the opposite. So that was the piece that was disturbing me. And so I took up to that challenging question to explore that how Orientalist discourses are displayed in these debates. There were other two questions that I also looked at. And one was that those who are proposing, do they have adequate resources? And what are exactly they are trying to do with that proposal and these tribunals? And how do they address the contemporary realities of Muslim women that against the social economic rights that Islam basically secured those rights? And I was also interested in, are there any differences between liberal secular sensibilities and Islamic orientation? And I was interested in this last question precisely because apparently, as I said, that there were two options presented, that even if you resolve family dispute through Islamic law, then that is one option. And the second option is going with civil laws. But what exactly we are doing when we say that somebody is a Muslim, but you are not allowed to practice or resolve your family dispute through that law, and restrict your basically religion, freedom of religion. And if there are differences and if something is that fundamentally is oppressing them or is going to hurt their fundamental identity as a Muslim, what are those movements or orientations? So I call them as differences between ontological differences, epistemological differences, and ontological, epistemological, and methodological differences. So I looked at these differences at different levels. For the sake of this presentation, I'm not going to focus on these two questions, but I'm going to focus on these previously stated questions because of the time constraint. But if anybody is interested, I'm happy to address these two questions if there are questions during Q&A. So why I ask these questions? As I said, that there are some assumptions built into these questions, whether Muslims should resolve their family dispute through Islamic laws or civil laws. And as I immerse myself into the scholarship, I recognize that there are two key streams here. One that I identify as apologetic or defensive approach, and the other one is antagonistic approach. So when I say apologetic or defensive approach, I came to know that much scholarship that defends Islam, that it is not an oppressive religion, it does give women's rights, usually lay out or uses this approach, that it compares Muslim women's rights to Western women's rights. And it makes this argument, for instance, give you just some examples here, that while Western women did not get their right to vote until 1900, 1920, Muslim women have that right since the advent of Islam, that is, we're talking about 7th century Arabia. Western women did not have right to own property, child custody, divorce, all of those fundamental rights that were as a result of women's rights movement. Muslim women got those rights in 7th century since the advent of Islam. And then the list goes on and on. So they make that comparison and saturate to defend basically Islam, that is not an oppressive religion. And the second approach is to refute Islam and fundamentally accept that, yes, Islam is an oppressive religion and women's rights are better protected in civil laws in Western countries. If we unpack such literature, what I realized was that if we take the first approach, even though at a face value, it might seem like that, yes, it is defending Islam, but nonetheless, it is a defense, which means that we are not fundamentally looking at what's wrong with Islam and trying to justify it, but we are not looking at what are the assumptions built into that comparison. Why are we comparing Western societies with Islamic ideas? And accepting that comparison uncritically is problematic. And it is problematic for the fundamental reason that we are not concerned about the limitations of Western societies. We are not concerned about the history under which the contemporary institutions are working. Rather, we are accepting at face value that Western countries are morally more developed than Islamic ideas. And this moral development, that Western countries are morally more developed than Islamic ideals, then also is going to lead us to the civilizing mission, is also going to lead us to ethnocentrism, is also going to lead us to colonization. And I will unpack a little bit that later on in this presentation. But for the refusal or accepting that, yes, Western countries are more morally developed, there is another problem. And that is that to say that Islam oppresses women is at a fundamentally removed from the very idea of Islam, because Muslims believe that the Creator is just, the Creator is Islam does mean peace, and the fundamental ideas built into that orientation is that Islam is peaceful, just, and it is to advance humanity according to their full capacity. And to believe that Islam is oppressive towards half of the humanity is just not built up or match up with the fundamental belief that Muslims have. So something that is going to fundamentally contradict the basic belief system was something that I was also not willing or seeing that how things are coming together. So because of these two frameworks, I wanted to explore something different. I wanted to explore I wanted to explore the fundamental assumptions. They were guiding principle, or they were guiding assumptions built into these two approaches that are well established in literature. So one is, as I said, the compatibility framework. The other one is a belief system that doesn't reflect Islamic core system, because it also leads to civilizing mission. We also need to recognize that there are more than 500 million women on this earth that they identify themselves as Muslim women. So if they are identifying themselves as Muslim women, and if we put forward this assumption that Islam is oppressive, so are we saying that all those 500 million Muslim women, they are just victims of false consciousness? They don't know that they are oppressed in religion. And that is also something as feminists that we need to recognize that, and victims of false consciousness also has a quite long history in feminism. So based on these, I wanted to explore something different and unpack the debates from these perspectives. In order to look at these debates more closely, I looked at the legislative debates over the two period, and they were happening, and how they were putting forward different debates from different perspectives, and what ended up happening as a result of these debates amending the law. I also looked at Miriam Boyd's report, and this report was, so Boyd was well known for her feminist work, women's shelter, and she was involved in many other women's rights organization. She was also a legal scholar, and she was put into task to look at the concerns that many organizations are raising. In her report, she collected many testimony, many documents, many statements, and over a period of time, she ended up releasing this report after a year or so, and admitting that she did not have any evidence to conclude that Muslim women's rights are in danger if they use faith-based arbitration. And that became such a big outcry, because as a feminist, people were expecting that she's going to come up with a different conclusion. And women's rights organization was also quite criticizing her, that how come that she didn't see any oppression. And so therefore that report became also a part of the controversy that I looked at. I looked at some different statements people released. I also looked at two newspapers, because Toronto Star was a local newspaper, and newspapers were reporting these debates every day, and then Global Mail was national newspaper, and they were also publishing different articles, different pieces, editorial pieces from different perspectives. So they were quite useful for me to look at what is happening at both at local and global and national level. So over the period of 3 years, I looked at these sources. So I have used this and this idea about discourse. I just wanted to make sure that I want to be clear about that, how I am using this. So there is much literature about that. What is a discourse? Basically, anything that any narrative that we put forward, or any discussion that we have, it is not innocent. Like we are doing it because we have some interest, some desires, some social political purposes behind that, and we represent certain people, certain narratives, certain knowledge in a very selective way, or in a particular way, and that is also not innocently doing this. So if Muslim women are being represented and oppressed, it is not just coincidence that we have this narrative. And because, as I said, that this narrative goes back to at least to the 18th century colonial period. So we see this repeatedly, and this is what it means, that certain knowledge and certain people are represented in a certain way, and it is not innocent, rather we have a political agenda behind that. It is also part of this idea that all knowledge, including feminist knowledge, it is not objective. It bears our marks. It is subjective, and any representation, any knowledge that we put forward or produce, it is subjective because it has our own biases, and researchers' biases, or political biases in it. So this is how a discourse is usually understood. And I also want to clarify what do I mean by liberal-secular sensibilities, because this is a term that I used in this book and I have used here in this presentation too. So by this, what I mean that the notion of freedom, right, equality, individualism, rational thinking, modernization, these are all ideas that after the Enlightenment period especially, that the Western countries have adopted. That they put forward this idea that all human beings are free. Our societies, Western societies, are based on the idea of individualism, not collective communities, for instance. We regard human thinking, rational thinking, as the highest form of knowledge production. And that is one of the reasons that we don't regard religious knowledge as the highest form of knowledge, because it is not based on human thinking, rather it is based on some spiritual ideas or some preconceived ideas about religion and religiosity that sometimes we even cannot even attest to. So they are not considered as the highest form of knowledge production. And that is also a contrast between Islamic fundamental epistemology, because according to Islamic epistemology, rational thinking is not the highest form of knowledge. Revelation is the highest form of knowledge. And this is something that I also talked about in my book. So these are ideas that we are more free, equality, rational thinking, modernization. We will see that how these ideas are also often used for civilizing mission, that we go around the globe and we say that Western countries are more progressive and everybody needs to adapt to their ideas. So civilizing mission and colonization mission is built into these ideas. And this is something that at the heart of my book that I explore, that how modernization and rational thinking and the idea that we Western societies are based on equality and they are more progressive, are fundamentally flawed, both at practical level, but also at abstract level. And also, if we really want to address issues of colonization, we also need to address these fundamental belief systems they are built on these ideas. So I'm going to share a few quotes with you. Direct quotes often provide us more clear window, the arguments that I'm putting forward here, and they will help us to understand that why I find those debates as Islamophobic and sexist. So the first quote that I'm going to share is that most at risk are young immigrants who come from the Middle East or North Africa, where Sharia is the law and has been used to subjugate them their entire lives. They know nothing different. And the second quote, before I unpack it, the place and behavior of women in Islamic countries is closely controlled, and the new freedom these women gain by coming to our country should not be jeopardized. So as you can see that there is a contrast going on that I was saying in the beginning regarding Orientalist discourses, that the Orientalist discourses are built on this contrasting image that the West is more civilized and the Oriental is uncivilized. And it is our responsibility to bring that civilization to those uncivilized people. And that is built into the inherent white supremacy. And it is not just, I know, Muslim countries and Muslim populations that they are subjected to these kinds of colonial and civilizing mission, but we all know indigenous people were also subjected to that. So the arguments that here and the way they are racist and sexist have much larger relevance if we just look at them, how the logic is working. So they know nothing means that their entire life they are unenlightened people. They have no other idea how otherwise life can be lived. And because now they are in our country, it is our responsibility, the new freedom that they have gained, that is our responsibility to bring to them that enlightenment and the freedom that they should enjoy. If we move forward, we will also see that the ideal, Western ideals are seen as the ideal that regardless of your religion, regardless of your cultural orientation or cultural background, these are the ideals that everybody not only has to follow, but also there is something wrong with them if they don't follow those ideas. So for instance, if we look at this quote that those who do not respect women's rights or whatever rights may be in our civil code, they should stay in their country. But if people want to accept our way of doing things and our rights, they will be welcome and we will help them to integrate. So we will see that those ideals then are used to regulate immigration. And anti-immigration rhetoric that we often see is built into this integration that you need to assimilate according to the Western norms. And if you bring something else, so if you want to conduct your life in a different way, then you don't have a space here. You don't belong here, and you should stay wherever you come from. And this idea of regulating immigration and integration not only does not take into account the colonization, but and proposing that Western white settlers, this land belongs to them, rightfully so. There is no regard that they themselves settled here through colonization. And now they are regulating other immigrants. And we will also see that the modernization idea that the West is more modern, and it is a gift to humanity, as many scholars have explored this idea and make these arguments that the Western white supremacy is often used as a civilizing mission and a gift to humanity, that if those white settlers have not come here or have not adopted to this civilizing mission, the rest of the humanity was just unenlightened and uncivilized. So it is a gift to the humanity that the white settlers have put forward and this is a great service that they are doing. So we will see that built into not only anti-immigrant rhetorics, but also built into white supremacy idea that these debates were suggesting. And when we see these specific ideas about medieval hellholes, you should go back to that. Or Trump immigrants are coming here and they are dangerous to our modern civilized society. We see that the contrast, the Orientalist contrast going on here, anti-immigration rhetoric is going on, and white supremacy is part and parcel of these arguments. Otherwise, they are not going to make any sense if we leave out that how the West is seen as more modern and civilized, and white supremacy as part of these arguments. I'm sharing specifically this quote with you to give you an idea that how those people who themselves were responsible either for women's issues or seen as feminist, they also buy into these ideas. So for instance, this whole idea that Muslim women or women are more subjected to family pressure or community pressure, and they don't have any other information, or they lack information, and that's why they make those decisions that they go against their own interest or interest of their children, is built into this idea that Muslim women are ignorant, that somehow if they are presented with information, they are going to make right choices. And what are the right choices here? The right choice here is that they are going to opt for civil divorce laws as opposed to Islamic divorce laws. So we will see that there is only one right way to conduct your life, and that is opting for civil Canadian laws. And we can fix that problem by providing those women more legal information. And the idea here is once that information is being presented, there is no other way around that those women are still going to be choosing for Islamic divorce. Within that, in addition to this framing, this binary thinking, and also believing inherently that if that information is presenting, women are going to leave their religion and they are going to opt for civil laws. It is also interesting just to highlight here that in Canada and also in the US, Muslim women's credentials actually are higher than their mainstream counterparts. So Muslim women have higher education. They are more professionally equipped. Their language skills are higher. Their educational skills are higher than their female counterparts. And in Canada, at the time that I did that research, and I know that later on too, it is also true for US, that we have Muslim women who can staff the entire PhD. With PhD, it can be staffed the entire mid-size university. So we will see that on the one hand, we have this mainstream narrative that Muslim women are oppressed. They don't know nothing. besides their oppressive religion. And on the other hand, when we look at the data and the population itself, we will see that their credentials are actually way more higher than their mainstream counterparts. So how do we make sense of this? That women, Muslim women have PhD, they are professional, and their other credentials, career credentials that we usually see as signs of agency, they are higher than their female counterparts. Nonetheless, they are still oppressed. They don't know anything else. So when we put together these two realities, they don't match up. So something else is going on here in order to put them into position or make this argument that they don't know nothing. And that is that unless you adopt to the Western norms and Western ideas and just conduct your life the way an average mainstream female is conducting, we are not going to see you as a liberated person or someone who has agency, but you are fundamentally oppressed unless you follow those ideas. So, as I said in the beginning, that these arguments were not just non-Muslim organizations, women's rights organizations they were making, but these arguments were also made themselves by Muslim organizations who are also working for women's rights. And if we look at, and I'm presenting a couple of quotes just to give you the idea that how they also use the same language and same logic as we hear right from the 18th century colonial period that the Western discourses have used. So if you look at these two quotes, the concerns we heard expressed by public, I'm sorry, okay, this is something different. This is the next slide. So let me take back. So one idea that often feminists have is that religion is oppressive. So at face value, it might also see making sense that don't we have to come to this conclusion that our religion are patriarchal, they oppress women. Before I go a little bit in more depth, I just wanted to share these two quotes with you that these organizations who were concerned about Muslim women's rights, they were not concerned necessarily about Christian women's rights or Jewish women's rights. Rather, they were precisely concerned about Islamic laws. And that was very apparent in these debates. So for instance, according to these two quotes that the public concerns that we hear, they were not about any other religion, but they were specifically concerned about the application of some version of Sharia laws. Or when we say that the proponent also said that if religious laws was allowed for other religions, namely Christians and Jews, then they must be allowed for Muslim. I would argue that it's not necessarily so. It's the offending practice. So I just wanted to make it clear that when we talk about patriarchal religious laws, we are not talking about other religion in this case, in these debates, but we are specifically talking about Muslim laws because that was very apparent. If these arguments were made very clear that we are not talking about religion. In fact, there were some debates regarding that because of Muslim laws. Now, Jewish and Christian also have to suffer because if the government was not banning all faith-based arbitration or not considering them as legally binding and just based on Islamic faith, that was for Canadian government quite difficult. So they didn't go to that route, so they ended up doing that all faith-based arbitration have no legal binding, and there was quite a cry around that because the argument was that Christian and Jewish were also going to suffer. So this was something, it was very apparent that it was about precisely Islamic laws. And I was saying that many Muslim organizations themselves also opposed such a proposal. And I just wanted to share a couple of quotes with you that they are to show that how they also use the same logic and same arguments. And here, but has another key twist to these arguments. So they position themselves as practicing Muslims, and they say that we are taking great risks coming forward and informing the Canadian public and by extension the Western countries at large, that it is fundamentally oppressive to bring back medieval times, and this proposal has a global relevance. And as I was saying, that these debates happened 2003 and 6, where 9/11 and war on terror was quite fresh. The threat of Taliban or jihadis or now ISIS, it was all around this. And it became very clear when people use the political Islam is taking a hold on us. And as people coming from themselves, from Muslim communities, we are concerned about this, and this is our duty to inform the larger public. So as these organizations, they also use the same logic and same argument. As I said, it has one other twist, and that is now because it is coming from insiders, and they know what goes into those communities, we need to pay more attention to that. So from that perspective, it is no racist or sexist discourse that is going on. Rather, we need to pay attention to the insiders who are themselves asking for protection and raising this concern that the global political Islam is taking hold, and therefore it is justifying any kind of ban on using faith-based arbitration, because now this demand comes directly from insiders and those communities. So it takes another level of justification of banning any use of any religious laws. And I have more around that. I will be happy to share if people have questions around that. But I just wanted to bring to this to your attention that it was not just non-Muslim organizations who were opposing, but Muslims from insiders were also proposing. But we also need to ask, why were those organizations given voice? And if we look at in numbers, they have very few in numbers, like we are talking of 100 people or so, or 50 people or so, and they are representing overwhelmingly the whole Canadian population. And clearly they didn't have that mandate from the larger Muslim population. Nonetheless, media keep reporting them and keep going back to them, because that was something that was sitting well. And we do have some voices, marginalized voices here and there who were opposing, but those voices were not, they didn't take the centerpiece, because they were contradicting to what the popular narrative was suggesting. So how do we make sense of all of this? And I bring some statistics here to saturate this whole idea that, don't we know that women generally speaking are oppressed? Don't we know that we live in patriarchal societies? Don't we know that religion is patriarchal? So all of those ideas that I call them common sense ideas, I want to saturate them. So it is not to say that Muslim women live magically in non-patriarchal society. Of course, that is not the case. But how the sexist and Islamophobic and racist discourses they play out here are that we isolate them as if it is the unique reality of Muslim women, that they live in patriarchal structures and the rest of the mainstream society does not. It is only through that contrast that we can make those arguments that Muslim women are more oppressed than anybody else. And of course, if we look at our Western society, especially Canada and the US, we will see that gender violence and especially violence against women is skyrocketing. These are some of the numbers that at the time that I did my study, I came up with, that date rape, for instance, accounted for 60% that was reported, or spousal assault in Canada was 83.33% at the time that I did research, or some other sources saying that approximately every 6 days, a woman is being killed by intimate partner. Or if we look at the numbers where women who go to shelters with their children because homes are not safe. So when we look at that, what is happening in the mainstream society, then we are going to realize that living in patriarchal structure is not just a unique reality of Muslim women, but that is the case of the average women in our society. And by singling out religion and Muslim women, we are not only suggesting that it is the unique reality of Muslim women who are subjected to religious violence, but we are also not paying attention to then what is happening in the mainstream society. And this tactic has been used, at least that in terms of Muslim women's narrative, oppressed narrative since the 18th century, because the Western discourses always use this, that they are the one who are oppressed, and our women here, they need to be grateful that how they are being appreciated and they are not oppressed. And that comparison with Muslim women is interesting for us to recognize that how this kind of positioning also deflect our attention what is happening in the mainstream society and those issues because of this contrast, and when we saturate them as a sole reality of Muslim women. Then there are other practical concerns that I also want to share with you. So this whole idea that if Muslim women are going to resolve their family dispute or divorce through civil court, then all of a sudden, as if all of their rights are going to be met, or they are not going to face any oppression. We all know that court system is not women's friendly. It is very expensive. It takes forever. In this case, I looked at, and the average time was 1 to 3 years to seek divorce. Much arguments in legislators themselves raised was that in order to go to the court, you need to have a deep pocket. It is not, in the end, that it is women is going to be come out as a successful divorce case. Rather, it is going to be who has the resources to hire the most expensive attorney and therefore get the favorable ruling. Much arguments were also made clear that most often not only women have to get loans to basically file this case and then fight for their favorable divorce case. In the midst of that, children suffer if their children are involved. And in contrast to all of this, the arguments were put forward that according to Islamic law, you can seek divorce within 3 months. Many Muslim communities and mosques, they offer as free of charge as part of their community service. They are more familiar with the laws, and it provides the divorce seekers psychological, emotional support, spiritual support, and many of them then also favor that why the government itself directed private citizens to seek divorce privately, because it also free up some of the resources, court resources, because the government does not want overwhelm in the courts. So there are lots of things that why the government itself was suggesting or encouraging private citizens to seek divorce through private resolution. And there were concerns put forward that the court system is not equipped to resolve Muslim couples' divorce issues adequately, because there are few key differences between Muslim marriage and other non-Muslim marriage. For instance, Muslim women do require a gift at the time of their marriage, and that gift is not subject to division, like whatever money or property or any asset that they require, it is just there. It is not going to be split at the event of a divorce. And court system were not equipped to that. Study also showed that there is no evidence, like people did quite in-depth study looking at those cases that they were resolved through tribunals, faith-based tribunals, and there was no evidence that Muslim women's rights were violated in any respect. In contrast, actually, they did find that when they went the same case went to the civil court, women ended up having with less financial aid, with less resources than what they got through an Islamic divorce. We also need to recognize that seeking Islamic divorce is very widespread. It has personal, spiritual, emotional relevance to Muslims, for both men and women. I alluded to a little bit to financial, how it can be more financially beneficial for Muslim women. Another piece here is that Muslim women legally are not required to support their husband or their children. It is the responsibility of the husbands to provide for their children. According to Islamic laws, legally speaking, whatever assets a woman earn, like the income or any other asset that she has, any property, any business she has, it is not subject to division at the event of divorce. It is solely under her control, and the husband has no legal portion in it. But as we know that if we use civil laws, of course, it depends state to state or province to province. And if we take Canada as an example, they vary nonetheless. Usually it is 50-50 split. So for that reason, there were some arguments put forward by Muslim women that actually I'm better off resolving my family dispute and divorce through Islamic laws financially than going through the court system. As I said, that there are also racism. Racism is everywhere, and especially after 9/11, Muslims were very alert to the way racism was operating, both in Canada and in their, generally speaking, the society, but also in court system. And many Muslims were reluctant to go to court system. And this whole idea of liberal secular sensibilities, that religion is a private matter, it has no bearing or it should not be from any public policy or any public institution, is also not true. Because if we